Good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight at the Allen Public Library. We have an outstanding program tonight. Steve Stoller, for 34 years, was a broadcast journalist. Some places he worked at was WFA Channel 8 and also Fox 4 News. And we're so delighted to have Steve Stoller tonight, the author of Tonight at 10. Steve.
Colleague Steve Stoller's fight against his cancer.
Steve Stoller has the story.
Here she comes. There's clapping.
Direct from Midland, Texas, Jessica McClure is up. She's alive.
James Monroe Lipscomb eventually surrendered after holding kids and teachers hostage for 30 hours.
I had never seen a person die before in my life. I thought to myself, wow, that was so easy, and something didn't seem fair about that to me.
God, I can't believe this. I can't believe this. I've got cancer. What have I done to get this?
Hello everyone, I'm Steve Stoller, and it's such a pleasure to be here with you tonight in Allen at the beautiful Allen Public Library, and I really appreciate this opportunity. Tell you a little bit about myself. Like Tom said, I was in the television news business for 34 years. I started my career in Macon, Georgia at what was probably the worst television station in the country, perhaps the world. Our call letters were WCWB TV. And if you worked there, those letters stood for, why compete, we're beat, or we can't, we're broke. So I wanted out of there pretty bad. I sent out about 359 resumes, and I got several job offers, one in Savannah, Georgia, one in Augusta, Georgia, and one in Kearney, Nebraska, which was the Lincoln, Nebraska market. So I went out to Nebraska. I worked there for 4 months. I got another offer after that in Asheville, North Carolina. A little bit larger market. It's paired with Greenville and Spartanburg, South Carolina. I went there, I worked there for about 3.5 years. And then I worked at a TV station in El Paso. That was my first station in Texas. Worked there for a year. And then I was hired by Channel 4, KDFW, which back then was a CBS station. Well, I worked there for 17 years. I did a lot of different things. I was the environmental reporter for a while. I was the legislative correspondent in Austin, covering the legislature. And then, after 17 years, I got hired by Channel 8. The last job I had at Channel 4 was Collin County reporter. So I covered Allen, Plano, McKinney, Frisco, and the surrounding area. Channel 8 hired me to do the same thing. So because it was the competition, I had to be off the streets. I had a non-compete in my contract. So what I did is I just voiced story, or I didn't voice stories. I'd go out every day, I'd shoot the story, I'd put it together, we'd edit it, and then we would take my voice out, and then the anchors back in Dallas would put their voice on my stories. And we did that for, I believe it was 6 months, and then I could be on the air. So I worked at Channel 8 for 11 years, and I finally saw a lot of my colleagues getting out of the business and getting these wonderful opportunities, some with big corporations, with hospitals. One became the spokesperson for Southwest Airlines. Another one became the vice president of public affairs for DFW Airport. And when I saw these people getting the opportunities, I thought, well, why not me? I have a similar amount of experience, or in many cases more experience than some of these people. So I felt comfortable that Channel 8 was going to offer me a new contract. It was coming toward the end, but I kind of wanted to explore and see what was out there. So I had some interviews. I interviewed with Atmos Energy. I interviewed with the city of McKinney. And then the city manager of the city of Plano interviewed me and actually offered me a position. They created a media relations department, made me the director of media relations. I've been there almost 8 years now, and I love it. It's great being on the other side from the media. Now I deal with the media, and I serve as the liaison between the local news media and the city government. But when I got out of the business, one thing that I always wanted to do, was a bucket list item for me, was to write a book. And I did the math, and I figured in my career over 34 years, I did about 9,000 stories. And I had a lot of fascinating, interesting, compelling things, very emotional things in some cases, that happened to me as a reporter. So what I tried to do was take the cream of the crop of all these stories I did and tell the stories behind the stories. That was the premise of the book. Things that the viewers who watch the news never knew about or never saw. So that's why I wrote a book. And you know, during my career in 34 years, I got to experience so many different things that I'm really just in awe over this long career that I had the opportunity to do that. I mean, I covered a lot of disasters, hurricanes, tornadoes, gas explosions in Brenham and West. I covered the San Francisco earthquake in 1988, otherwise known as the World Series earthquake. I was watching the game between the Giants and the A's, and just like everybody in the nation saw, there was an earthquake right before the game. The next morning, I was on my way to San Francisco to cover the earthquake. I got to interview presidents. I was in Waco when the Branch Davidian saga was underway for many, many weeks. Just so many things. And one of the things that I covered, I want to take you back to 1987. I came into work and they said, Steve, we're sending you to Midland because a little girl has fallen into a well and there's going to be a major rescue operation to try and get this girl out. So I didn't have any clothes or anything. I just went straight to Love Field, flew to Midland, met a photographer there, and the saga began. This little girl was in the well for 58 hours. And I'd like to show you a video of the moment they pulled little Jessica McClure out of the well.
And there are no difficulties here. Here she comes. There's clapping.
Live and direct from Midland, Texas, Jessica McClure is up. She's alive. What a fighter.
That was the words. You could hear his voice, and you probably recognize that was Dan Rather of CBS News. That moment was captured not only all across the country, but all across the world. Everyone was rooting for these rescue workers. Guys who worked in the oil fields, ambulance drivers, there were paramedics. Hundreds of people converged on this backyard in Midland, Texas, to do what they could to get this little girl out. And it was amazing when they did pull her out. Horns were honking in Midland. People were setting off firecrackers. It was really an amazing feeling. We were there for most of the 58 hours. My photographer had managed to get a very tall ladder, and he was on the top of the ladder with his camera. I climbed up the ladder, and I was right under him. We would take turns getting off the ladder to stretch our legs and to go get something to eat. But we stayed at that ladder for most of the time that she was in that well. The story behind the story that few people know about, because it was never reported, was that these guys were digging a hole parallel to the well. And they were going to go, she was about 28 feet down in the well, so they were going to go down 28 feet and then dig horizontally to get to her, break through the well, and get her out. Well, while they were doing that, all of a sudden they turned off all the machinery, and it was silent. And we knew something was going on, but we didn't know what. So I got off the ladder and I went up to one of the rescue workers and I said, what's going on? He goes, well, we've had a microphone down in the well and we've been communicating with baby Jessica, and all of a sudden she stopped communicating back with us. And the reason why everyone was so quiet and somber was they wanted to see if they could hear something from her in the well. And the fears were that she wasn't with us anymore. So they brought her mother, and Sissy McClure was her name. They brought her to the edge of the well, and she got down on her knees, and she started singing the Winnie the Pooh song into the well. She said it was Jessica's favorite song. So she sang and we listened, and there was like a collective heartbeat stopped. Everyone was listening, hoping to hear something. And sure enough, little Jessica started singing that Winnie the Pooh song from the well. And it's funny, I tell the story, this happened in 1987. And when I tell the story, I still feel that same emotion that we felt that night. But after they heard her voice, they realized she was still alive. There was a new vigor, there was a new sense of urgency to try to get her out of the well. Well, they finally got down to 28 feet, and then they thought, well, wait a minute, we can't break into the well where she is, otherwise we may injure her further. So they had to go down another 7 feet before they went horizontal. And then once they did, they broke through the well. They tried to pull her down. The smallest, most petite paramedic there went into the trench, and she was stuck. One leg was up above her head. I mean, this well was about 22 inches wide. It's amazing that she even fell down that far. And then her other leg was down below her, and she was pressed against the sides with her hands. And the paramedic asked them to send down some Vaseline. He took the Vaseline, he coated her as best he could. Finally, she slipped down. He bandaged her up inside the trench, and then they lifted her up on those cables with him, with baby Jessica in his arms, as you saw there in the video. And that moment, boy, that's something that will live in my memory forever. I mean, it's just so amazing. And she has no recollection at all whatsoever. On the 30th anniversary, former NBC News anchor Matt Lauer went to Midland and interviewed her. And believe it or not, after 30 years, it was the first time that Jessica had ever been in the backyard since she fell in the well 30 years prior. So it was an amazing story. The next video I want to show you, I witnessed 2 different Texas executions in my career. One of them was a case here in McKinney, another one was a case in Dallas. And there was a journalism conference in downtown Dallas, and one of the journalists who was putting on a forum on the death penalty looked at the witness list for Texas executions, and he saw that my name was there as a witness for 2 different ones. So he asked me if I would speak and just give my impressions of seeing the death penalty carried out for the first time. So I did, and here's a clip. I didn't realize it, but there was a camera in the auditorium, and I just thought, maybe it was the organization that was holding the conference was shooting video. No, it was C-SPAN. So this is my thoughts on what I saw, the first execution I witnessed, played all across the country on C-SPAN.
Robert X.L. White didn't suffer in death. He didn't suffer like his victims suffered. I was really surprised and kind of shocked at what I was feeling. I didn't write about it in my story because I didn't think there was a place for it. I wanted to remain objective and I wanted to tell the story, but I thought to myself, wow, that was so easy, so painless, so quick, so peaceful. And something didn't seem fair about that to me.
X.L. White had gone to McKinney into a very small convenience store called the Hilltop Grocery, and there were 2 teenagers getting gas at the time. They went in to pay for the gas. There was a 71-year-old man behind the counter. X.L. White came in and robbed all 3 of them. I think he got a total of $12 and shot all 3 of them execution style in the back of the head. I had covered this case because X.L. White was on Texas death row longer than any other person that ever served in prison on death row in history. So because it was a local case, I was the Collin County reporter, I did a lot of stories on this. So when it was time for his execution, I wanted to hear if he had anything to say to the victims of those 3 people that he killed in cold blood. And he didn't have much to say, but that's how I really felt. And it's probably the only time in my career where I was asked publicly to say what I really thought about a situation that was a news story. Because like I said, I always wanted to remain objective. And even if it was a topic that I was emotionally involved with in some way, or I had a strong opinion, I never let that enter my psyche when I was doing a story. I really tried to focus on being fair, being objective, and being in the middle. And really, there were so many controversial stories where in the morning you interview one side of the controversy, and you listen to what they have to say, and you think, they make some really strong points. I understand where they're coming from. Then in the afternoon, you're interviewing someone from the complete opposite side, and you hear what they've got to say, and sometimes you end up saying, they've got some really strong points too. I understand exactly where they're coming from. And your job as a journalist is to be down the middle and be fair, tell both sides of the story, and let the viewer decide if there's a right or there's a wrong. So with XL White, knowing the crime that he committed and seeing how easy it was when he was executed, he was gone in like 5 seconds. He didn't really appear to be suffering. It sounded like he was snoring for a very short period of time, and then he was gone. And I felt like, God, that was really peaceful and really easy compared to the crime and the way he shot those 2 boys and that 71-year-old man. Well, that was my honest impression. That's what I thought. I wasn't commenting one way or the other on the death penalty. I was just giving my honest impressions for the first time and only time. Well, once they started airing this forum on C-SPAN, I started getting hate mail from all over the country about my barbaric comments and how could I say those things and what was I suggesting, that they cruel and unusual punishment in the way that it wasn't enough to give him a lethal injection, that I wanted more. Well, I never really said that, but I just couldn't believe it. I learned my lesson. The one and only time I ever gave my real feelings on something, and it came back to bite me. So from that point forward, it's like, nope, no one's ever going to know how I feel about anything. I'm not going to ever show it in my stories one way or the other. And even in conversations, going to a party, someone asks me no, I don't go there. I don't go there. And now that I work with city government, I feel the same way. So a lot of people think they know where I stand. A lot of people think I'm a conservative that leans to the right. A lot of people think just because I was in the media, I'm a liberal and lean to the left. So it's better for just me and my family to know and no one else. And again, I never tried to let any of that affect me and how I told a story. So this next one I want to tell you about in the book is called The Big Lie. And the reason why I want to tell you about this story is because it affected me it just had a major impact on me. And it took away some of my faith in people and humanity. And I just learned that sometimes appearances are deceiving, and you can't always believe what you hear. I mean, of course, that's common sense. But let me tell you about this situation. I got a call from the general manager of what used to be Bankston Ford. It's over here in Frisco, right at 121 in the tollway. He said, Steve, I've got a great story for you. I said, what is it? He said, I have a guy, he's my top salesman in our pre-owned cars, got called to active duty to go to Afghanistan. And I said, well, that's great, but a lot of people at that time were getting called to active duty. What makes that a news story? And he goes, let me finish. He said, the day he's supposed to report to active duty is his wife's due date with their first child. And I said, oh boy, that's a story. That is a good story. Because he doesn't know if he's going to see his first child born before he ships overseas to Afghanistan. So I said, oh, I would love to do the story. He said, I talked to him already. Him and his wife would be happy to talk to you. So I went to their apartment. They lived in the colony. And I just thought he was the greatest guy. Just a patriot, loves his country, understands that he really wants to see his child born, of course, but he also follows orders and he's heeding to the call. And if he doesn't get to see the child being born, he gets it, he understands. He's going to risk his life for the country to go to Afghanistan. So we did this story, and I just thought the world of this guy. I mean, really humble, Very, very nice guy. You know, just, I really liked him and his wife. They made me feel really comfortable. They seemed as sincere as could be. So he calls, I said, you gotta let me know when the baby's born and if you get to see the baby being born. So sure enough, a few months pass, he calls me up, Steve, I got some great news. We had our son tonight and we're at the hospital in Louisville. And I said, well, hey, is it okay if we send a camera out to get some video of you and your wife and the baby? He goes, absolutely, come on out. He goes, I'll arrange it with the hospital, make sure everything's fine. So we went out there, I didn't go, we sent a photographer, they got some video, and we updated the story on the news. Now at this time, I was at Channel 4. So he ships off the next day. He got to see his child being born. 3 months go by, and our competition, Channel 8, my friend Brett Shipp, who I used to work with at Channel 4, and then now he's working at Channel 8. It's funny, we followed very similar career paths. He breaks a story that this soldier, Marine reservist, Thomas Ladas, is back in town, and he interviewed him, and he had a bandage wrapped around his arm, and the story was that he showed heroism and bravery in helping some Marines out, and in the process got wounded when he took some shrapnel in the wrist, and they sent him home. Well, I broke the story originally, no one had it, and now here's my competition with the follow-up when he comes back. My boss, the news director, was incensed. She called me up and she goes, did you see the story on Channel 8 last night? And I said, yes. She said, what happened? You broke the story. Why didn't you know he was back? I said, I don't know. I don't have an answer for you. I said, you know, he didn't call me. I said, the general manager at the dealership didn't call me. How would I know if he was back or not if I didn't get a call? She said, well, Brett Shipp knew. She said, you need to call Brett and you need to find out how he got the story and you didn't. Very competitive, very competitive. So Brett's my friend. I called him up and I said, hey, Brett, I go, my news director is so angry with me that I missed out on that story. How did you know that he was back? And he goes, Steve, I'm so glad you called because we're running a retraction tonight. I said, a retraction? He said, you know, after the story aired, I started hearing from all these veterans in the area, and they felt something wasn't right about his story. So the story was, he was referring to a letter from the sergeant's commanding officer that was praising him for everything he did in Afghanistan. Well, Brett said he called the commanding officer at the Marine Reserve Base in Shreveport, and the commanding officer said, I didn't write that letter. I said, oh no, didn't write the letter. He goes, Steve, it gets even worse. I said, how could it be worse than that? He goes, well then, he told me that Thomas, the sergeant, was never called to active duty. I was stunned. It's like, what? Wait a minute, he never went to Afghanistan? No, he didn't. So the whole story, he had the baby, yes, but the whole thing about him going to Afghanistan was one big lie, which is what I chose to name the chapter, One Big Lie. I couldn't believe it. If you would have met this guy, there's no way that you would have had any doubt whatsoever about him going overseas to Afghanistan and fighting for the United States. You would have felt like me, I have no doubt. I was devastated. It's like, oh my gosh, if I can't believe him, who can I believe? Who can I ever trust again? It affected me in a very powerful way. We sent a reporter out to interview him at his apartment, and he cracked the door open about that far and said, I'm sorry, I'm not at liberty to talk, and slammed the door shut. I tried to find him when I wrote my book, and I couldn't find him anywhere. I looked, I Google searched, I looked under records, I couldn't find a thing. I don't know where he is, but you know, that story lives on, and that had such a powerful emotional impact on me. So another experience I want to tell you about is when, a very rare thing in television news and journalism, I became the story. I was working out one night and I took a shower and I felt something in my armpit that felt like a golf ball. And guys, you know how we are, things like that happen, we just rationalize and blow it off. I thought, well, I must have pulled a muscle or something. 3 months went by, it's always in 3 months, and I went to my doctor for a sinus infection, and while I'm sitting in the exam room, I'm debating whether I should tell him about this golf ball in my armpit. Finally, I said, yeah, I should probably tell him. I said, hey, doc, feel this. I said, what is this? I said, I've had this now for a few months. Boy, when he felt that, his whole personality changed. You know, him and I always joke around about things. He became gravely serious. And he goes, Steve, I'm going to send you to a specialist. I want to have that looked at right now. I said, why? What could it be? He said, it could be 350 different things. Worst case scenario, lymphoma. I said, lymphoma? Wait a minute. If it has oma, doesn't that mean it's cancer? He said, yes. He said, but let's have it looked at. Let's have it sonogrammed. I left his office. I went right to the specialist's office in the same building. They sonogrammed it. He says, I want to operate on you tomorrow. I want to take that out and see what it is. We're going to put you under. I said, okay. I said, does it have to be tomorrow? Can it wait? He goes, oh, you can wait, but it's like sitting on a ticking time bomb. I said, I'll see you tomorrow. So sure enough, they took out my lymph node. They did the biopsy, calls me up the following day and says, Steve, you have Hodgkin's lymphoma. I said, I have cancer. Yes. My wife was 8 months pregnant at the time. So John Hammerly, who used to work at Channel 4, lives out in California now, he was our medical reporter, and he was a friend, so I was telling him everything that was going on. And he says, listen, Steve, this is before I got the results from the biopsy. He goes, let's hope it's nothing, but if it does turn out to be cancer, we have a really unique opportunity here. We can follow you as a cancer patient literally from the day you're diagnosed through treatment to whatever the outcome is. Are you in? And I said, yeah, I'm in, because look at me. I mean, I went 3 months with cancer in me. I didn't even know. I didn't even think anything about it. If we could encourage one person who's a viewer as a result of this series of stories to go get checked for something that they're not sure about, and they find out it's benign and it's nothing, we've given one person peace of mind. We've accomplished something great. But on the other side of the coin, what if somebody actually has cancer and we encourage them to go see a doctor and get checked? They find out they have a malignancy. We may help someone catch it early and save their life. And when I started thinking in those terms, I said, John, let's do this. This is really important. So he did, every time there was a milestone in my treatment, when I was first diagnosed, he did a story. He came to my house, interviewed me and my wife. He called the series The Cancer Chronicles. Then when I did my first chemo treatment, he was there when the nurse was explaining to me all the different side effects from the 4 chemo drugs they were giving me. They did a story when I went through radiation after chemo. They were there when I did my first radiation treatment. And then this is in the beginning, about 2 months in, I was still doing chemo. Something pretty incredible happened. We had our baby, our second son, and this is John Hammerly's story from that moment.
You might remember 3 weeks ago, John Hammerly brought you the story of our colleague Steve Stoller. He has Hodgkin's disease. Tonight, the second installment in the Cancer Chronicles.
Ashley, you might remember about 6 weeks ago, Steve was complaining about he had a lump right under his armpit, and he kind of blew it off for a while, and then he went to the doctor 48 hours later. Confirmed Hodgkin's disease.
Bad news.
Yeah. Steve's been through the first of his 2 chemo sessions already and getting ready for a third. He's got another 3 months of chemo to look forward to. But he and his wife, Susan, aren't looking that far ahead. They can't.
Valentine's Day, he asked me to marry him.
7 years ago, Steve's ability to communicate hooked Susan right away.
He was my best friend, and still is.
And Susan says Steve's willingness to let his emotions out sustains them now as his fight against Hodgkin's disease picks up steam.
We've got too much going on right now, you know, the baby coming, and, you know, we've got so much to look forward to that we have nothing negative. This is just a bump in the road. I don't care as long as the baby's okay.
If they hadn't learned yet, the Stolers found out again Friday night. This is not the year they should make plans.
I'm excited. I can't wait.
Steve wasn't the only one. The Stolers had scheduled Tuesday to deliver their second child by C-section. But baby Stoler had different ideas.
Okay, you ready to have this baby?
There's never a good time to hear you have cancer, but the timing in Steve's case was downright lousy.
Because I was diagnosed with Hodgkin's disease about a month ago, it's been a difficult time for Susan and I to deal with me having cancer.
Later, Steve called this night, in his words, a conglomeration of the good and the bad.
I think part of the thing that has kept us together and kept us strong and positive and going forward was that we knew that this day would come today.
As did Steve's other family.
Usually when you have a pedicure, you go into labor. I said, Sue, do not have a pedicure. Oh, it won't happen to me. I go home, Mom in labor. I said, Susan, you had to have a pedicure? You couldn't listen?
For Steve, there will be plenty more days to fight his cancer, but tonight is reserved for new life.
The beginning of a new life. Our son starts here tonight, and there's the whole future ahead of us. There's so many things to be happy about. I'm going to be okay eventually. I'm going to be cured in a matter of months. That's a foregone conclusion. You know, let's put that aside for a second and let's concentrate on a new life being born.
Jacob, think of your fat little thing. You're a fat little thing.
A hefty 9 pounds, 13 ounces. He's definitely a Stoler. I wasn't about to let a diagnosis of me with Hodgkin's disease dampen my spirit of having a child and having a new life in our family. I mean, gosh, when you're having a baby and you're having a kid and you're adding to your family, who can think about cancer?
You know, one of the amazing things that happened during the Cancer Chronicles is I started getting letters from the viewers. And I think I got about 200 letters over the period of stories that John did. And these were not just get well cards. I mean, these were heartfelt letters. I got one from an inmate at a Texas state prison who told me that every day, he saw the initial story, said every day at rec time, him and 9 other inmates get together and form a prayer circle and pray for my family and for my health. And you know, I laughed when I had this image in my mind of these guys in these orange jumpsuits holding hands praying for me. But then the more I thought about it, I became really emotional about it, thinking, gosh, that's amazing. I got another one from a student, 19-year-old student at UNT, and she saw the first story and she goes, you know, you looked pretty concerned, pretty grave. And she said, just know that one day you'll look back at this whole experience and you'll laugh because you'll realize how bad it could have been. Some of these letters were just so heartfelt. I had tears when I would read these letters because they were so amazing and so powerful and so meaningful to me. I made it a point to write every single person back that wrote me a letter. So that was an amazing experience. I'm proud to say that John actually won 2 awards for the Cancer Chronicles for the portrayal of a cancer patient going through everything from start to finish. Update on the cancer situation. 2 years ago, I went in for a regular checkup, and once you're 50, you have prostate exams. My doctor felt like something was not right, so I went to a urologist. I ended up having prostate cancer. And it was a very small amount. We were doing active surveillance, which means that you watch it. You watch the PSA level in your blood. As the cancer grows, the PSA level goes up. And finally, my doctor said, you know, you're healthy, you're relatively young for a prostate cancer patient. I really think that you're a good candidate for radiation. So I said, let's do it. I wanted to be proactive. And I just went through radiation, not too far off. I finished in February of this year, and everything went well, and I feel fine. So I am now a 2-time cancer survivor, and when I finished radiation treatment, I wanted to do something out of the box to celebrate my survivorship again a second time. So I want to show you this photo. I went and got a tattoo. I got a tattoo of a cancer ribbon, and I figured if I was going to get my first tattoo at my age, it has to be something that's meaningful and deeply personal to me. So now I wear that proudly on my arm as being a survivor, not once but twice from cancer. So let's leave it on a happy note. I know I've talked about a lot of different things. I know everybody loves outtakes, commonly known as bloopers. So I want to show you some video. This was shot in the lobby of Channel 4. And the story was about Christmas trees and how certain what is that stuff called? It's flogging, I think, flocking. It's like that spray that you put on the tree to make it look like it's snow. Well, very flammable. So we wanted to show our viewers the potential hazard from using that on a Christmas tree. So here's some outtakes. I hope you enjoy it.
Trees are left up, the drier they get, becoming fire hazards. As you can see, it would take just seconds to turn this Yuletide symbol into a pillar of flames. In Dallas, Steve Stoller, News 4 Texas. As you can see, it would take just seconds to turn this Yuletide symbol. As you can see, it would take just seconds to turn this symbol of Yule. As you can see, it would take just seconds to turn this Yuletide symbol into a pillar of flames. As you can see, it would take just seconds to turn this Yuletide symbol into a pillar of flames. In Dallas, Steve Stoller, News 4 Texas. Coming here with that water.
Happy to say we did not burn the station down that day. Oh, and one other point, I can't believe I forgot to say this, is that my son, who was born in that video you saw, just had his 24th birthday. Graduated from UNT in hospitality management. So yeah, it's been a long time, and it's funny, he doesn't realize this, but every time he has a birthday, I celebrate another year of survivorship. So Tom, I understand we have some questions.
Tell us about your Emmy that you garnered.
Well, there was one night, we used to do a lot of storm chasing, and a lot of times that's exactly what it was. We would get behind the storm, and we'd never catch up. Sometimes we'd drive into it, and you're driving into the worst part of the storm. Sometimes we'd be in hail, high winds. So one night, there was this terrible, severe thunderstorm, and it was coming through northern Collin County, very close to Westminster. And sure enough, it touched down, and we were right there in Westminster. We didn't see a thing, we didn't hear a thing, but we came on this one road, and all the lights were out. It was pitch black, and we pulled over to the side of the road, and I saw a foundation, and there was no house on the foundation. So this man comes walking out from nowhere, and he goes, "Oh my God, my house is gone." We had missed the tornado probably by about a minute. It rolled through so fast that we were behind it again, but we didn't see the actual tornado, but we got there very quick. This guy had gotten a call from the parents of a woman who lived next door. They couldn't reach her and her husband, so they asked if they could go check on them. He left his house, went to check on them. When he came back, his house was gone. Tornado wiped it right off the slab.
It was that quick.
It was that quick. So we had team coverage. We had different people in different areas that had been hit by the tornado. We had someone up in the helicopter once the storm moved out. So we won an Emmy for team coverage of that tornado.
How'd that make you feel when you were notified?
Well, I was excited when they told me that I was nominated. I had been nominated one other time.
And what was that?
I don't even remember because I didn't
You were
win.
nominated for an Emmy and don't remember?
Honestly, I can't remember. But I remember the one I won. So they had the ceremony in Houston, and we went to Houston, and it was really exciting to get that trophy. I mean, it sits on my mantle to this day.
Well, that's quite a plum in your resume.
Well, it gives you the opportunity. I've won one in my whole career. I know people who won many Emmys, and it just gives you the opportunity to say that you're an Emmy Award-winning reporter,
And
which
indeed
is
you are.
exciting.
When I looked at your resume, I saw so many things that I would have personally nominated you for an Emmy for, and I mean there were dozens, and the Tornado was how you want it. And I've been close to tornadoes many times, you know, like they were a couple of blocks away and that sort of thing. And yes, when you hear the warnings on the news about tornadoes, take it seriously, because they can spot these tornadoes down to the inch as to where they are now. And literally, I was watching it. It was literally, you know, like 1,000 feet, 500 feet away, and then it goes a certain direction. So the lesson learned is to pay heed. Yeah. What is your favorite story that you ever did?
You know, when you do 9,000 stories in a career, that's a lot of stories, but there is one that stands out. It started with a phone call from a woman that lived in Richardson. And, you know, to this day, I'm not quite sure why, of all the reporters in Dallas local news, she decided to call me. But she said her son was the singer in a R&B band. And he went by the name of Big Rockin' Daddy. His name was Gary Blakey. And Gary had terminal cancer. And his last wish was to meet his idol, the king of the blues, B.B. King. So she said that she actually managed to call B.B. King's manager, and he was going to be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland, and that if Gary and his wife went up to Cleveland, they would arrange it and he would meet B.B. King. So when he got to the theater where they were going to have the ceremony, the security people didn't know anything about it. And he gave up, and him and his wife turned around, took a cab, went back to the airport, flew back to Dallas without him meeting B.B. King. So she said, Steve, I don't know if there's anything you can do or not, but it would mean so much to him if there's something you could do to make that happen. So I asked for the phone number of the manager, and I called him up and I said, listen, I'm a reporter for the local TV station in Dallas. I don't want to talk about what happened in Cleveland. Is there any possible way that we can make this happen somewhere else? And he said, well, he's one of these New Yorkers where every other word is baby. He goes, listen, baby. He goes, next week is the New Orleans Jazz Festival, bad place, can't do it there. He goes, but you know, the following week he's going to be at the Grand Casino Resort in Gulfport, Mississippi. He goes, I'll tell you what, you get him to Gulfport and we'll make it happen. I said, do I have your word? He said, you got it, baby. So we actually rented a van. Southwest Airlines, I called them, they comped their airfare. Then I got a van in New Orleans. We flew to New Orleans, drove to Gulfport, and then I called the PR director of the Grand, and she fell in love with the idea. She said, we're going to comp their rooms, we're going to give them front row seats to the concert, all their meals are going to be comped, we're going to make sure he has the time of his life. So sure enough, we got there and they took us into a green room. They had these two big reclining chairs there, and Gary sits down in one. We have our camera set up, and B.B. King walks in the room, and they have this wonderful conversation. B.B. King talks to him for about 45 minutes, and at one point, Gary turns around and he looks at me and he goes, I can't believe this. I said, what? He goes, I'm sitting here with B.B. King, and I'm talking to him like he's my next door neighbor. And then a few weeks later, you know, he passed away. His mother called me.
It was that quick?
Yeah, it was that quick. It was about 3 weeks after he met B.B. King. And, you know, we interviewed him afterward, and he said, I'm just so honored. He's such a great man, you know, and I'm just so thrilled to have the honor of meeting someone who's just so incredible as a human being and as a performer. And this is really cool too. During the concert, about halfway in, B.B. King, in between songs, said, ladies and gentlemen, we We have a special guest here with us tonight. He's from Dallas, Texas, and his name is Gary. He says, Gary is sick. He said, Gary, I want to tell you something that I've always believed my whole life. And then he looks right at him and goes, ain't nothing over till it's over. And don't you forget that. And then Gary had told him, B.B. King asked him, is there a particular song you'd like me to play tonight? And he goes, well, gosh, I sure wish you'd play The Thrill Is Gone. He said, my band plays that song, and that's my favorite. And B.B. King, I mean, that's his signature song. Of course he's going to play it in concert. But B.B. King said, oh, okay, we'll see if we can get to that one. We'll try our best to get to that one. And right after he said he addressed Gary, he went right into The Thrill Is Gone. So that was my favorite story. And the irony of that story is a few weeks after I talked to his mother, and she told me he passed away, is when I was diagnosed with cancer. Yeah.
You know, I've been involved with situations where you're trying to get to the security, to get through the security and get to the general manager to arrange for an interview and so forth. And I'm well aware of the countless challenges that you must have gone through to make this happen. You just don't call somebody up and they answer the phone. That must have been, how did you overcome all those challenges?
Well, you know, I didn't think I would. I mean, when she first asked me, it's like, where do I start? What do I do? And once the manager said, you know, let's make this happen, here's a scenario where it will work, really the most important person there was the PR director at the Grand, because she really went out of her way. I mean, she knew the significance of what this meant to him, to a person who had very short time left on this earth. So she put everything into place, and really, once she got involved, it really made it easy. Everything just fell into place perfectly.
We've had another question from our television audience. Thank you for telling your story, and congratulations on your long career in the news business.
Thank you.
Trust in journalism has been essential to transparency in our society and confidence in government. Recently, Gallup released a report that indicates 40% of Americans trust the media. It was at an all-time low of 32% in 2016. The trust factor was much higher back in the 70s and 80s. What's changed, and what does it mean for our country?
That's a really good question.
This is from our own Mark Hoffman.
You know, I think one of the things that has changed, social media is one, and this is the other thing right here, smartphone. You know, our news director at Channel 8, right before I left, she was fairly new, and at the first staff meeting, she held up her cell phone and she goes, look folks, like it or not, this is how people get their news nowadays. And our challenge is to engage them on this thing so they'll even want to watch our news at 5, 6, and 10. And she was right. But part of the problem is now with social media is that, and with smartphones, is that we have a lot of citizen journalism now. So anyone with a cell phone is a citizen journalist. And a lot of times, especially when something happens, everyone is reporting their own information on social media. Legitimate mainstream media should be very discretionary as to what information they use. You know, ideally, they should back everything up and make sure that sources can confirm information that's coming from social media, right? Here's a situation. When the Space Shuttle Columbia came apart over Texas, right at the same time there was a fire reported in East Plano by Bob Woodruff Park. All the TV stations went out there with their live trucks. Everyone was on the air because they went with the assumption that it was a piece of debris that fell through the roof of this apartment complex that started the fire. I was pretty new at that point. I wasn't on the air yet, so they were just showing pictures from a camera that was tied to the live truck. The news director called me up at Channel 8, David Deutsch, and he said, have you been able to confirm that shuttle debris started that fire? And I said, no. He goes, we are not going on the air with it until you confirm that that was started from the shuttle. Everyone else was on the air already. And everyone else who was there was looking at us like, why isn't Channel 8 going on the air with this? You know, they're getting their butts kicked by not going on the air. So I knew the fire chief very well. He came out and I said, what do you think? He goes, electrical short in the attic. He goes, this had nothing to do with shuttle debris. Then everybody else, a few of the stations reported that and backtracked. Some of them just packed up and left and never reported it. We never went on the air. And I felt so good. It's like, you know what? That is journalism, and that's how journalism works. You can't just run on the air with something. You better back it up and make sure it's right. But now, it's so competitive. You know, you can watch when there's what we call a breaking news or spot news story, and a lot of information is coming from social media. A lot of TV stations will report what they see and say that it's coming from social media, but then once the facts come out, like from law enforcement, it's not even close to what the people are saying on social media. That's one problem. Another problem is that you have all these websites now, YouTube channels, and people are presenting their stories as if it's legitimate news, but it's opinion news. You know, one thing that I've really been disappointed with, like some of the major news networks, you got 24 hours to fill. They're on constantly. It used to be news. Now it's all the pundits. It's like, we're going to tell you what's happening now for a minute, and then we're going to spend 30 minutes explaining with all these pundits. If there is opinion with any news story, it's no longer objective. It's no, in my opinion, it's no longer journalism. You know, journalism is all about presenting a story fairly and objectively, you know, and getting all sides of the story. There's a lot of what I see on you know, especially the major cable channels where that's not happening. It's like Fox News has a conservative lean. You know, MSNBC has more of a liberal lean. CNN, you know, sometimes I don't know what it wants to be, you know, but they kind of have a lean to the left. So that's not good for journalism. And I think as a result, that's why people have lost their trust in journalism. I still believe that the main major news networks, you know, the CBS, NBC, ABC, they have a 30-minute newscast. They don't have the time for all the pundits and all the opinionated content. So I still think your best bet if you want world news or national news is with the major networks.
Well, it used to be in the, and it still is in the, say, the Dallas Morning News, that they would represent both sides of the story. This is what this witness said, this is what that witness says. And then they would verify what has been verified by other sources. And so you have a confidence level that you're reading the truth. Whereas nowadays, the first thing I do is look to see who's posting this and then who the poster is, the actual person. And if they're a person who has rendered opinions that have sometimes been proven wrong, I don't even start to read it. I don't care who they are.
You see, part of the problem now is people will go to sources that enhance their beliefs. So it's no longer, I'm just going to this place and I'm going to get the news and it's going to be presented objectively. It's like, if I have a certain political belief or if I lean a particular way, instead of just going to the mainstream media, I can now find anything I want that's going to enhance whatever it is I believe or whichever way I lean politically. You know, and I don't think that's good because, again, I don't think these sources, I don't think it's true journalism.
Well, I remember watching Huntley Brinkley, you know, say in high school, and they didn't put anything on the air that hadn't been double-checked and rechecked.
Right.
And when they did, occasionally they did make a mistake, but they owned it. And so you knew that whoever reported it had lost their credibility. So also, I'd like to, you know, warn the public, look at this person writing it, just the person look at the name on the who's submitting it. And if it's somebody that you've never heard of, under some phony something, you better be careful. What's in your area work in journalism? What's the one thing that you almost made a mistake on?
Well, I mean, we're only human.
Yeah.
You know? So, I mean, there are some things that sometimes, you know, you're doing an interview and someone tells you something, and then, you know, part of it is you have the videotape. So before you put your story together, you're listening to the interviews that you did. But sometimes it's possible that you misinterpreted something, or you may have heard something wrong, you know? And I mean, those happen. Mm-hmm. Those happen. Fortunately, I don't remember anything in my career that was such a major mistake that it caused a huge problem. A lot of times if somebody called me to tell me that something in my story was wrong, you know, I would apologize. The thing is, now with so many websites, you can correct it on the web story, but if you've already delivered it on the air, it's got to be pretty significant to do a retraction. You know, and I can't recall any stories I did, thank God, knock on wood, too.
Well, that speaks well of your professionalism.
Well, yeah, I mean, I took it very seriously. I did.
Was there ever a story where it was everything you did to fight back the tears?
Oh, there were stories that I let the tears flow.
Can you talk about them?
Yeah. The first one that comes to mind was, it involved people who were crossing the border illegally. It was Sierra Blanca, Texas. It was a desert area, not that far from, it was not as far west as El Paso, but it was like in a very rural desert area. So the coyotes who smuggle people across the border, they had locked 31 people into a boxcar. The boxcar was separated from the train, sat on the track. It was about 104 degrees in the desert that day, and they were just there suffocating. 31 people. One guy managed he had some kind of spike or something, and he picked and picked and picked and made a hole that big, put his face down on the hole, and he was the only one of the 31 that survived. Can you imagine the horror? 30 people were suffocating, they couldn't breathe, and he's the only one who survived. We got an interpreter and we interviewed him. And then I guess it was the next day, they started sending the bodies back. And it was from a very small town in the center of Mexico in the state of Aguas Calientes. And the little town was Pabellón de Arteaga. And we went there, and the entire town closed down, and everyone came to the plaza in the center of town. And the hearses came in. There were hundreds of people there. And it was like a scene out of a movie. I mean, people were fainting because that was also very hot in central Mexico. And then crying everywhere. And then it was so quiet. Everyone was just so deeply respectful as these bodies came back in hearses. And then someone shouted out, "Viva Mexico!" And the whole crowd started chanting, "Viva Mexico, Viva Mexico." I was so moved emotionally that I couldn't control my tears, you know? And, you know, a lot of people talk about immigration, illegal immigration. When you're down there and you talk to some of the people and you hear their stories and you see why they're risking everything, you know, and they're leaving their families. And at that time, what they were doing is they were coming to Dallas, a lot of the guys, and women too, they were working in the kitchens of restaurants, and then the small amount of money they get paid, they're wiring back to their families in Mexico. You know, when I saw that from that perspective, you know, it's like, wow, this is really powerful. You know, it gave me at least a little bit of understanding why they do that. You know, not saying it's right, but from a compassion standpoint, and as a journalist, again, you're trying to understand why people are doing what they're doing and telling their story.
Can you tell us another story that?
Yeah, I covered a trial. The trial was moved from Collin County to Midland. It was the little girl, Ashley Estelle, that was murdered. She was at a soccer tournament at Carpenter Park in Plano. Her brother was playing and she disappeared. And her body was found a few days later. They had a massive search. And a man named Michael Blair, a carpet cleaner, was arrested for the murder. After the trial lasted almost a month, when they finally reached their guilty verdict, some of the jurors came out and they were talking to Mr. and Mrs. Estelle, the parents of the little girl that was killed. And it wasn't then that I got emotional, but our photographer was shooting some of the video of this interaction between the jurors and the parents. When I got into the satellite truck and I started looking at that tape, it's like I had covered this story from her disappearance to the search. I covered the trial for a month. You know, I had a lot emotionally invested in this. And it's funny, as a reporter, it's like you keep an emotional distance, because I think sometimes if you got emotionally involved with every story, you'd be a manic depressive, you know, but it was at that point where it's like it hit me that this was all over and the parents felt that they got justice. And when I saw that interaction, it was so compelling and so sincere and compassionate that I just lost it.
I was emotionally involved with that story because the little girl was actually found here in Allen, on the west side, back when it was a rural, I think it was in the late 90s, somewhere in there, 98, 99.
Yeah.
And her body was found in West Allen in a rural area. And even though it's technically Allen, the Plano police asked if they could follow up with the murder investigation. And as I recall, they had somebody monitor the area, and this Blair showed back up. That's how they caught him.
Yeah, actually the crime scene team was there at the site where the body was found, and Michael Blair showed up and was asking questions. And he had articles in his car about the murder.
And a toy.
Yeah, he had some stuffed animals. He had like a Quaker Oats canister that was covered with construction paper that had candy in it. Yeah, so I mean, there was a lot of really compelling evidence against Blair, and he was convicted. But then, back then they couldn't do what they do now. It's called mitochondrial DNA testing. They needed tissue from hairs, the follicle, and the hair wasn't enough. They couldn't do DNA testing on just a strand of hair. So they had these forensic people testifying about the similarity of strands of hair that were found in his car, that they couldn't say it was an exact match because they couldn't do DNA testing, but they said they were microscopically similar to Ashley's hair and his hair. Well, years later, they did the mitochondrial testing that can determine DNA from just a strand of hair, and they determined that the hairs weren't a match. So based on that, they set aside the conviction.
Oh, really?
Yes, and he already had, here's another story about Michael Blair, is I interviewed him twice, and one time when I interviewed him, you're behind a glass window and you talk over a phone when you're at death row. So he had a briefcase and he started taking out all these pictures of these children. And I tried to motion to him, like, what are you trying to tell me here? So finally he picks up the phone and he says, "You see these kids?" He goes, "I molested these kids." He said, "I'm not a murderer. I never killed anyone, but I molested these kids." And he was only convicted of one molestation. So I had some friends who were prosecutors at the Collin County DA's office, funny, who I actually work with now in the city of Plano, both of them. And I said, how can he have these photos of these kids that he says are his victims, number one? Number two, has he ever been prosecuted for these crimes that he's so willing to admit that he did? And they kind of looked at each other. So they talked to the Dallas County District Attorney's Office. A few of the kids were from Dallas County. They did an investigation, and he got 2 life sentences on 2 of those cases. So even though the death penalty conviction was overturned, he's not going anywhere. anytime soon. He has 2 other life sentences on those other charges. And I think the Collin County District Attorney's Office made a decision not to pursue another trial because it would have been, probably the same result.
So you helped facilitate these prosecutions.
Well, I'd like to think that I played a little small role in it.
That is so sad and so tragic. And as I recall, like you said, it occurred at a soccer tournament in Plano with hundreds of people there.
Right.
Did he ever admit how he lured this girl away?
No, there was an interrogation that the Plano police did with him, and it was actually admitted into evidence. And boy, they were really pressing him hard, and it came so close to what appeared to be a confession. They said, "Michael, you were there. We know you were there." And he went, I don't know if I was there or if I wasn't there. I may have been there. I don't remember anything. Well, the way I felt is if you were innocent, you would never say, maybe I was there or maybe I wasn't.
Well, the reason I ask these questions is what lessons we learn to have parents be careful of.
Right.
In their protection of their children. But apparently he didn't ever fess up to what his strategy was.
Right, never did. But Ashley's laws were passed as a result of that case because Michael Blair was out on parole.
Oh, he was?
Yes, he was out on parole for a sex offense. And Ashley's laws really started the registration of sex offenders, so that they couldn't live in certain areas where children are, certain neighborhoods within a certain distance of a church, of a school. That all started with Ashley's laws as a result of her murder.
Well, Steve, it's been such an honor to have you here today, and I had countless calls wanting to see this program, and every one of them said that they had seen you somewhere else, but they'd like to see you again. It's like watching a movie again.
Well,
so that's the best honor you can have if you're a movie producer, and have somebody want to watch your movie twice.
Well, I really appreciate that, Tom. I was very passionate about my career as a journalist. I took it very seriously, and it meant a lot to me. And I'm just very, I don't know what the right word is, very thankful that I had such a long career. Because 34 years in the television news business, that's several lifetimes.
I was about to say, you don't look like you're old enough to have all those years.
I appreciate that.
I had our own, this is the question that was submitted by Mark Kaufman, said you had done something with our City of Allen Channel 16 a number of years ago, perhaps with Plano. But your passion with the broadcast industry is also reflected at your passion with the City of Plano. I looked at some of the things you've done, and I said, wow, that's some cool stuff he's put on. So congratulations for your career, both in broadcasting and with the City of Plano. And it was an honor to have everybody attend tonight, and thank you for coming.
My pleasure. It was an honor being here. Thank you for having me, Tom. I appreciate it.